record button. And so just as some background, this was born in part out of our survey that Rochelle and I sent out to members of the Women's SIG in November of last year. We were curious to know what the members were looking for from us and their leadership. And so in the survey responses, we learned that they were interested in connection and specifically mentoring and workshops. We then talked about this further at the AGPA Connect meeting, and then we had another follow-up in April. And throughout all of that, some of the themes that we were discovering were women's tendencies to undermarket themselves, not giving themselves full credit of their accomplishments, their roles, and not being willing to promote themselves in a way that a lot of our male identifying counterparts do with a lot more ease. And so we wanted to create a series where we could highlight women, particularly within AGPA, to share their secrets to success and perhaps help reinforce a pipeline for younger, newer, other professionals within the field to also learn from those who've made it. So that is some of what is bringing us here tonight. Now I'll turn it over to Rochelle, who may be frozen.
It's frozen.
He does look frozen.
Yeah.
And now she appears to be gone. So I will proceed with introducing our speaker tonight. And that is Dr. Suzanne Phillips. So Dr. Suzanne Phillips has her PsyD, and there's several other. Well, now she's
trying to get back in.
Here she comes. Ah.
Welcome back.
Hello again.
I'm telling you. Technology.
So I had just started to read like the first line, like her name of the bio. So if you want to proceed from there, you're welcome. And if you get kicked out, I'll just pick up where you left off.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Carmen. My name is Rochelle Renee, and I'm the co-chair of our Women's SIG. And we have the honor and pleasure to welcome our first speaker of our speaker series, the illustrious Dr. Suzanne B. Phillips, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, psychoanalyst. She's a diplomate in group psychology, a certified group therapist, and is a fellow and co-chair of community outreach for the American Group Psychotherapy Association. She has been a psychologist for over 35 years, and after 28 years, she is a newly retired adjunct full-time professor of clinical psychology at Long Island University Post in New York. Dr. Phillips has provided services and trainings nationally and internationally on trauma response and disaster, 9/11, the earthquakes and natural disasters in China, in Haiti, in India, in Italy, Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy, the California fires, school suicides and shootings. In February 2008, as community outreach chair of AGPA, gave testimony before Congress for the needs of military and their families. On a yearly basis, she runs the weekly AGPA's Camp Galaxy for military children going on doing war at the 106th Rescue Squad in West Hampton, New York. She's the co-author of 3 books, including Couples, A Couple's Guide to Coping with Trauma and Post-Traumatic Stress, Public Mental Health Service Delivery Protocols, Group Interventions for Disaster Preparedness and Response, The Analyst Pregnancy, Intrusion into the Analytic Space, and over 40 articles and book chapters. Dr. Phillips is the host of Psyched Up Live, an international talk radio show on the Variety Channel of Voice America. Her most recent blog in Psychology Today, Tattoos After Trauma, 6 Qualities of Healing, was promoted to essential reading on the Psychology Today trauma page. Ladies, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Suzanne Phillips.
Thank you. I am honored to be your first speaker, and I'm loving all the new and friendly known faces that I see on this. I want to just start by reading two quotes that I came across to sort of set the stage. The first, feminism isn't about making women stronger. Women are already strong. It's about changing the way the world perceives that strength. That's G.D. Anderson. And the second, by my hero, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dr. Phillips, for taking our invitation and joining us. So we'd like to start by really asking you, what brings you to this point in your career, and what can you share with us today about lessons learned?
Okay, when I thought back to how long I've been doing this, it's wild. But there were probably a few consistent themes that I think I want to pass on. One of them is, in our field, if you come across something you love, even if no one else seems to care about it, treasure it, read everything you can on it. If you come across a patient or a group that particularly moves you, maybe that's for a reason. So for me, group was always a big piece, and trauma was always a big piece. So I'll pull us way back to the 70s when I was in Rutgers. I was a doctoral student. I was living in Staten Island and driving back and forth. I was newly married, and I found out about parent effectiveness training and couples effectiveness training, and I sent away for all the material and became certified in that. And I decided I was going to do groups, and I was going to share whatever it was that I had learned, which I started to do free. When I was passing things forward, I was so eager to do it, I didn't care if people paid me. What's the result of that? Many people came to the groups. And that not only gave me a sense of confidence, it gave me the feeling I was making a difference. While I was at Rutgers, I was very interested. The professor I was working with for my dissertation was dealing with masked depression. And I had always wondered, somewhere along the line, I had the opportunity to work with runaway girls as part of my internship and part of the externship you had to do. And I wondered if runaway behavior in girls was actually masked depression. So before I even had found a chair, I went to Menlo Park, where girls who were arrested for being runaways, which is outrageous when you think of it, they were in prison there, I will say it that way. And I spoke to the director and I said, I'm thinking of doing a dissertation. I'm wondering if in fact, the runaway behavior on the part of these girls is really masked depression. Do you think I could come a few days a week and ask the girls questions? I have a survey, speak with them informally, make their days here better. She said yes. So for 2 summers, I spent a few days each week with runaway girls. And one of the things that I found out, which I also came to know about other teens with trouble, is that these runaway girls ran away for very good reason. They were probably the healthiest people in their family. But given, and that we know all about this, the structure and the law, they were the ones picked up, they were the ones incarcerated, they were the ones labeled juvenile delinquents. But so that really added to my passion about trauma and response. Now, the groups that I trained to do, I eventually used. I was also in a center for unwed mothers. These were girls so young, some didn't know how they became pregnant. And the group training that I had sent for and shared, the nurses asked me if I would do a group with them, and then if I would do a group with the girls. So over and over, if I look back at my history, it's about trauma and it's about group work. Now, I want to tell you that over the years, it happened that my mentor was a man, David Heschley's a member of AGPA, And he would sit, we were at Rutgers together, and we finished our doctoral work, and he said, Sue, we now have to do postdoc. I said, we do? So we did postdoc. And then when I finished the postdoc, he said, Sue, you've got to do group training now. So I did that. And one of the interesting things is that I could never attend AGP, even though I was a member, the meetings, because I had sons who played basketball at the exact week of our conference. And one played for college, they were rising stars, or so they thought. And so I couldn't do it then. But as they got older and went to college, what happened? 9/11 happened. And at that time, AGPA started to ask the fire department if they wanted intervention. And the fire department was a little hesitant, but we had wonderful funding. Somebody, the head of the counseling office of FDNY, I got a call from her and she said, I'm looking for someone in Suffolk County where we have a lot of firefighters who knows trauma and does groups. And I said, I think I can do that. And she and I became really co-leaders in a tremendous amount of outreach. And we pulled in, and that's the other lesson learned. That is, giving is getting, and pulling in your colleagues is getting and giving also. So we ran we ran workshops for hundreds of fire department members and their wives who were decimated after 9/11. They were never going home. They were staying at the pile. Their marriages were in trouble. Their children were frightened. So we put together and wrote a manual for that. We then met with the offices, and we came up with the realization that offices, and mostly firemen and military and police, they do not want to be treated. That is too demeaning for them. So we changed it into buddy training. Everybody lined up for it. So anytime we thought we could do something, and in all this work, we kept reaching for our members. So in the Couples Connection, which had within it videos and vignettes and role playing, it was hilarious what we did. The couples laughed. We had funding for them to have a weekend in the hotel, dinner, meals, and a Broadway show. Could you imagine how great our New York Times funding was? And when we first got there, the men were huddled together, as firefighters would do. The wives were huddled together. First of all, we never had anyone drop out. And by Sunday, midday, they were sitting as couples with their arms around each other. It was remarkable. Every time we did it, and we did it over and over, we had a waiting list. We were more and more surprised at the power of group, the power of couples meeting with other couples. And we had an incredible team. One thing I'll say to anyone listening is, if you have a situation that you want to do outreach in, something that, let's suppose it's medical trauma, it could be police, it could be children of divorce, remember, there's thousands of us standing behind you. So I knew, and I've continued to know after the pre-scandal, when I went out to Camp Galaxy, when I've done the flight rescue training in New Jersey, when we met in Europe, that there's always members who are eager to join with you. Shoshana and I have presented together. It's a blessing that we have, and we are a group. One radio show that I did, I just want to tell you about, it was the Queen Bee in the Corner office. And in it, Olga Kassan, writing for The Atlantic, talks about the fact that the research was done on 60,000 women. They were asked, would you prefer a male or a female boss? What did they choose? A male boss. Why? They said women are impossible to work with. Now, how can that be? But the more, then she brought on, in her article, she starts asking psychologists, what is this about? Men prefer men, women prefer men. And we started to think about something that maybe we've come to understand. There is a bias, a gender bias. And so for a woman to get into the corner office, she's had to be tough. And sometimes that has translated into aggressive. Some of the theories are that if I'm in a minority and I get to be with the majority, I want to separate myself out from the minority. So I'll say things like, oh, my friends were always men. I always preferred men workers to female. So I now don't open the door for other women because I've identified as a man. So one of the things that she says, I said, how do we handle this? I love what she said. She goes, we can't think of it as a queen bee in the corner office. We have to work as a hive. All the women work is together, because who could compete with a hive? And I think that's how we need to think, even as women in AGPA. I think we should reach for all our colleagues, male and female, but I think we have to be sort of on alert to mentor and to bring forward as many women as we can. And one of the ways to do that is whatever your interest or expertise is. Open the door up and reach for someone who might join you. I mentioned before, and they have to be brave, with the earthquake in Haiti, Connie Concarin called me and said, Sue, there's this young psychologist, Rochelle, and she's Haitian and she's willing to go as part of psychiatrists on the East Coast. It was Doctors Without Borders, and a group of psychiatrists were going. And I called her and I said, would you be willing to go and represent us? And gutsy as she is, she went. I felt like my daughter was there. I was worried the whole time she was there. But she got there, and from the stories that you've told, she read the cues. She went into a building with young nurses. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to talk to her. They said this building could come down. There could be another earthquake. And they all went outside. She filled me in a way that I was able to pass forward to other groups here who were responding through online and other ways to the Haitian crisis. We had boots on the ground through Rachel. She was young and she was wonderful. Rochelle, I'll call you, she knows me with names, I'm terrible. But Rochelle was wonderful. And that's the kind of lesson learned that I would love to pass forward to you, is that the more you're willing to do without pay, and the more you're willing to bring along colleagues, the more the sphere opens. When the priest scandal hit, I contacted pastors and I said, I'm a psychologist, I know about trauma. If you think I can help you, contact with me. They all contacted me because they don't know where to go. That is, we have an expertise, and sometimes we have funding and sometimes we don't. The way the blogs came about and really was that Diane and I wrote a book about this couple connection. We had seen so many couples that we thought, we can't see everyone, but what if we wrote a book that essentially had everything in the program in it? So we did it. We wrote a book on that. And it's interesting, Rochelle knows that when my one son was in a terrible car accident, we became a couple in crisis. But I knew ahead from having sat with so many, we have to keep exercising, we have to work together. When we start to fight, it really means we're so frightened we don't know what else to do. So that I really had a sort of personal experience of the value of the book. Well, Healing Together blog contacted me, that was Psych Central, and said, would you and Diane write a blog for us? And she said, Sue, I'm done. I'm not writing anymore. And I said, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. Well, I loved writing the blogs, and I would get an idea and, I did the best I could. I would send it out and people would read it or people wouldn't read it, but it was very exciting for me because I thought I can reach a lot of people if they happen to want to read it. And it happened that I got a call once, I was in Florida, from a man who said, I am on a radio show in Michigan and I read your blog on the sandwich generation. I feel like I'm in that. I'm squeezed between my parents and my kids, and I don't feel I can satisfy anyone. Would you come on my show and speak about that blog? So I came on his show, and then he asked me on his show again. And I said to him, how would you feel about having a regular psychologist as a regular guest every Wednesday night? He goes, would you do that? I go, sure, that would be great. We'd both have a lot of fun. And we did that. And pretty soon that station asked me, did I want my own show? And that was the first set of radio shows that I did. We did about 100 shows. And then for personal reasons, the woman who was behind it had to leave the country and she shut it down. We didn't have copyrights or anything, but I learned about the power of asking people to come on and accepting that some people wouldn't. And the idea there is the idea of my present radio show which is to provide a platform to pass on information I don't have, but that I want to pass on to other people. And sometimes to give someone who I think has an important message a platform. So, and I'm going to rerun this show. At the time when we were hearing that people of color were afraid to get the vaccine, and you can understand their hesitation with systemic racism and distrust with the health organizations, I read about a female epidemiologist who had gone back to her small town in Georgia to convince her family they had to get the vaccine. And so I contacted her and I said, I think you have such a great message. Would you like to use my show as your platform? And she said, yes. And so often if I think, and very often people have a message that's very important. We did suicide with doctors. We did moral injury in doctors. I read about a young veteran, and he had a documentary, and I had been asked to speak at the showing of that documentary, but I asked him to come on the show. I wanted other military folks to hear what moral injury was and that he could not shake it. So he goes on a whole mission across country telling his story. I had come across blended families in the work I do, as many of us have. So I found somebody who had written a book, and the book was people who had grown up in blended families and were authors, each wrote a chapter. And it became a compilation of the real stories of children who grew up in blended families. And so I did a show with them, and I've done a show with military women, and I did the show on tattoos. The show, Four Ways to Save Your Relationship, was my second. Well, I should tell you that Psych Central went down. So then I thought, now where am I going to blog? So I contacted the head of Psych Central and I said, do you have any suggestions where I could blog? And he said, you might try Psychology Today. But before I could ever try them, they contacted me. Now, my guess is maybe he made a call for me. And they said, do you want to blog for us? I said, yes. So they were very fussy. They have beautiful blogs because the title can't be more than 80 characters and on and on and on. So the second blog I did in there was says something like, everybody wants a good relationship. There are over 1 million hits on every book about improving your relationship. And I said, I've siphoned through a lot of this material, and I'm going to give you the 4 basic things you need for your relationship to be a good one. No one shows up for a good relationship. I'm paraphrasing it. So I posted, it's my second blog, and I look at the numbers, and it goes from 1,000 to 2,000 to 100,000. I think, oh my God, Psychology Today is wild. This is wild. Well, that has never happened with another blog, but I will tell you that it was a kick. But I also realized that that's a topic people really want to know about. And I have, as you know, I've done a lot of couple work. So I could go on, but I'm going to stop and ask you, Rochelle and Carmen, and anyone on how we proceed, and do we want to do questions?
Well, thank you so much. It's been really enjoyable thus far. We do have one question in the chat that was posed by one of our members, which says, my understanding has been that part of marketing ourselves is way too much for free or not charging enough for our services. I live in rural Missouri, and I know one therapist who charges $165 per hour, no insurance, and she's getting it. What are your thoughts about our fees for service?
Rachel, I was choking. Could you read the first part?
Sorry, are you okay?
Yeah. Rochelle, read it again.
All right. My understanding has been that part of women under marketing ourselves is doing way too much for free or not charging enough for our services. I live in rural Missouri, and I know one therapist who charges $165 per hour, no insurance, and she's getting it. What are your thoughts about our fees for service?
Well, I'll tell you what my philosophy has been, and I will tell you that I'm old, so I came into a situation where insurance wasn't choking out our young professionals. But always I had a sliding scale. And so that if someone came to me and I really think they needed help and they said, and I said, what could you pay? And they said $50, I took $50. But my other fee was higher than that. My other fee was $150 or more than that if it was a couple, and it's gone up during the years. But my fee has been adjustable. If I think somebody really needs help and they don't have insurance and they've tried it, and I think I can be of help and I can fit them into my schedule, I have done that. But I would say, and I know you're boxed in by this, be on some panels, but don't be on all panels, so that you have the option of building into your practice some private pay people. Now, I know once you're on a panel, you cannot not take the person's insurance, but I would say try not to box yourself into all panels if you can. The other thing that happens in terms of outreach work and people asking you to do work is that sometimes it's paid. The more well-known you are, the more you get paid. But generally, in the past month, I got a call from the Salvation Army. Would I do a talk about hope? That they had read my hope blog and they were doing something about instilling hope. The Salvation Army had an initiative going, and I will never say no. I will never charge for that. Someone else called me. My youngest son, who lives in Brooklyn, at the time, his friend had owned a restaurant, and she and her mother were doing a blog on grief and food, if you could believe this. And they had suffered grief, and this young woman felt food is very soothing. And food is connected with grief. Some people stop eating, some people overeat. So my son Christopher was talking, and she said, we have a radio podcast. And he said, oh, my mother has a radio podcast. And they said, would she come on? Well, of course I went on. And I talked about the enduring presence of our loved ones, that I never go with the original analytic theorists who say we decathect, we must move through the stages of grief. I don't believe so much in that. Having dealt with so many people with so much loss, I believe that, I think these are the words of Joanne Cacciatore, that grief is a sign of love. We have great grief because we have great love. At this anniversary event, people will feel great grief, not because something's wrong with them, but because it makes absolute sense. And the other thing is, I believe we hold an enduring presence of the people that we love. So I say to people all the time, I speak to my mother all the time. I tell her, you would not be able to take what's going on. But for the show, I had to think about food. And as Rochelle knows, I'm not the biggest eater in the world. But over COVID, I started to cook, look up recipes. And so one day I was holding up an eggplant, and I said out loud, what a beautiful eggplant. And I thought, my mother's channeling through me. I would never say this. She would talk about food. She would talk about food being beautiful. But to make a long story short, of course I would say yes. So one of the things that you can't go broke and say yes to everything and not be paid. But choose wisely and continue to promote yourself by being visible. Now, once you do something, consider where else you can bring it. Consider where else you can write about it. Also bring in members. Very often, if you have an idea, group together with 2 other members and present it at an annual meeting. Group together with other members and provide it as an e-learning. If you're in a neighborhood and you see there's a problem with something and you have some experience where you can bring it, either ask a colleague to join you or knock on the door and see if people want your service or want your outreach or your help. That's how you build your bio. That's how you build your experiences. And that's what makes people trust you, because if they've seen how much outreach you've done or how much women's a connection you've done or women's empowerment you have done, I think it makes a very big difference in the likelihood of people saying yes.
I'm grateful for your response to that, Dr. Phillips. I think one of the other things that's on my mind from what you shared earlier, you mentioned that you hadn't made it to an AGPA conference until your sons made it to college because you prioritized their basketball. They were your sons. What perhaps either earlier in your career or as you continued were the challenges of family life along with professional life? Was that a hurdle for you? Did you find that that got tricky or murky at all for you?
I think it has to get tricky or murky. There's no other way that it happens. And so I never really stopped working. I took 3 months off for my first maternity leave and 6 months for my other. My office was in my home. That facilitated that, but I was also teaching. But I worked our schedules, my husband's schedule, my schedule worked out all right because I would cluster all my patients in the evening when he was home. So I sort of had the benefits of his schedule and my schedule in doing that. I think it brings to mind something that we just did a show on this, that one of the groups that suffered the most during remote work were moms. They had to use their homes as the office. They were dealing with kids on Zoom. They had all their other responsibilities. And the other thing that happened more to women, women of color, and gender varied people diverse, gender diversity, was that they were harassed. Many of them didn't think of putting up a screen. So suddenly they felt people were in their homes. And in one case, 2% of the people in a population of 2,000 got calls 10 times a day from managers. And when women said, I can get back on the call, I'm just going to set them up at work, they felt they got pushback from that. So your question's great, Carmen, because it really, I mean, women are in the workplace, but women are really still having a rough time in the workplace. One of the things that one of my guests, Therese Hudson, talks about is how women decide. And one of the things she says is 75% more times is the word aggressive used in a woman's personnel file than in a man's. Generally, in one case, one woman she'd go for the promotion, miss it, go for the promotion, miss it, 4 rounds. Finally, she left and got a really great job somewhere else. And she happened to meet Therese, who was the person who checked this out. She said, do you know what happened there? Therese said to her, and she said, I don't know, and I don't care. I've got a better job now. She said, but I just want you to know something for your information. You were not promoted because they did not like the bangle jewelry. They said you were too out there with your jewelry. When you think about this. So even though Ruth Bader Ginsburg is telling us we should be in all places, we are still fighting to be in certain places. And I think for those of us who don't have to fight so hard at this point, we can't leave the battlefield without the rest of the crowd. So anything we can do to promote women and to give them, any opportunities that they could use. In that same study that Therese talked about, she said, people always think men in the boardroom, they're analytical, and women are intuitive, so they just grab on their intuition. Not true in the studies. When a big change is going to be made and we have women and male bosses in the room, the men go with their gut to take a risk. The women have all the data. Why? Because they know if they go with their gut, someone's going to say, where's the data? But they're not going to say that to the men. Another thing that's interesting is if a woman or a man are working together and he's made a mistake, she'll still continue to hear his opinion about the project. If she makes a mistake, he stops listening. So we not only have the glass ceiling, but she talks about the glass cliff. A woman makes a mistake, she's going down. A man makes a mistake, not so quickly. So, for all of our strides, and now when we include diversity and we include systemic racism, we have intersectionality, which really adds on top of it to everything else. I had Juliet McCandon, who I had heard speaking, a Black psychologist whose specialty is intersectionality and mental health and physical health. And she said, I don't think people realize until they looked closely at systemic racism, they kept saying, oh, it's the comorbidity with people of color. She said, it's not the comorbidity. There is comorbidity, but it's because of the fact that they haven't been able to be in the neighborhoods with better health care. They haven't been able to get their children into those schools because the taxes are better. One of the things she shared is a Black male with a degree, a high-level degree, is going to have a more difficult time getting a loan for a house in certain neighborhoods than a person who actually has had some credit problems, a white person with credit problems. And those are the things that when you hear them, you can't magically make them go away, but the more that people know about them, and the more that we recognize that if you're a woman, you're going to have a problem in the workplace. If you're a Spanish woman, you're going to have more problems in the workplace. And if you are a transgender woman, that was the other group that was harassed during remote work. They felt like people who never told anyone that they were gay or bi or whatever their gender choice was, all of a sudden a partner would walk by. All of a sudden there was something in their house that revealed a little bit too much. And then they felt they couldn't work backwards and they felt they were harassed. So I asked the person who came on the show to talk about this, because she was a civil rights lawyer. I said, so what do you think we could suggest? She said, we have got to do more about human resources. People don't go to human resources because human resources discourages them from reporting. And that's the mistake. The company thinks if human resources discourages reporting, they're going to have less legal suits. She goes, they have more legal suits. The more they discourage the reporting, the more the harassment, the more the job place problems, and the more legal suits you're going to have. So the question I think for us is, how involved are we ever with running a program for human resource people? Now, of course, they're often, she said, if they're in the pocket of administration, there's nothing you're going to do, but there's got to be a way to think about being safe in the workplace. Because if you actually have been harassed and you go to human resources and you're told, let it go, where do you go at that point? I had a young man who was working in a hospital and was so overworked. He was at one Sunday that he called me. There were 60 people in an emergency room. He was the only radiology tech. And when he went to human resources, that's exactly what happened. They said to him, do you want to keep working here? And he left. That's what has to happen. But it's very hard to leave if you need to support a family, or you are the primary, source of income for that family. So I think when we look at what's going in the culture, I keep thinking of how to approach the police, because I did so much work with police after 9/11. But it's so, I remember them talking about being trained to be in this command presence. And when they're in the command presence and they have an implicit bias that sees Black men as aggressive, when they become frightened, they're very dangerous. So you almost need an overhaul of the way young police officers are trained. You need change from the top and the bottom, but the way they're trained almost sets up some of the violence that we've had in the Black community. I was once, go ahead.
No, I feel like on a much smaller spectrum, that's similar to what you were saying about couples when they experience grief.
Yes.
The anger and aggression comes out as their fear.
Mhm.
And granted, we're not talking about systemic racism and bias in police violence, but it feels like a similar mechanism that you're discussing what comes up in that fear-generated response.
I always say that the most frightened person in the room is the most dangerous person in the room. And if you add shame into it with men, you have a very violent situation. I have, when women are dealing with a domestic violence and how they're going to get out of that situation, we talk a lot about who are their allies on the outside, men and women, how are they going to leave, when are they going to leave? And because going to a shelter often means when they come back, there'll be more violence. I once had a guest on the earlier show, which was, her book was great. It was Battered Women, Smarter Than You Think. These women had creatively found ways to prepare to leave. One woman sewed money in the hem of her garments. And in every case, they made a connection with a church, with a colleague, with a friend, so that they had a safe house rather than going to the shelter, because it's very, very dangerous. I've had shows where men talk about protecting women. One of my earliest shows was on men's voices against violence to women, and it started out, I heard about a college kid, and he had no dad, and he worked with his mom, and he lived with his mom, but he was a very sensitive kid. Jonathan Kalin is his name. And on the campus he was at, they were having slut parties. And they made up t-shirts that said slut parties. It was in the middle of the real beginning of the hookup generation. I had just done a show on that. And he changed it to consent parties. And he had hundreds of t-shirts made up with consent parties. Well, pretty soon everyone wanted a consent party t-shirt. So I invited him on the show. I invited a man who was a former representative, Michael Paymer, who had written about treating men from domestic violence. And then I had another person who had done a documentary. And the person in the documentary was talking about the fact that I watched my father beat my mother. I swore I would never do that. I went into the military, I came home, and I beat my wife. And I went then into treatment. And so I thought the idea of men speaking out against violence is an important thing. I think that we shouldn't leave men out of our hives or out of our groups, because especially the men in AGPA, we really have strong, sensitive men who are very, very responsive to women's needs. Sometimes when I was reading about the material for the show on the workplace, I thought, I can't picture too many people in AGPA, men in AGPA saying some of these things or doing some of these things. Now, we don't have, a group of saints, but I think that as women, it makes sense to reach for our men colleagues too. I don't think I would have been connected to AGPA had it not been for Dave Heschley's, because he loved it. And back then it was really a little bit more of a men's group. I think we have met much more representation from women and Shoshana, I don't know if you would agree, but from what I hear from Kathy Ullman and from Kathy Ryder, I think we've really equaled things out. We've had presidents, men and women presidents, and we have people who are chairs of our SIGs, look at this SIG and other SIGs. But so I think it's worth reaching for men to help other men and to help women too.
That specifically answered what I was going in my mind to ask, what kind of benefits have you seen in AGPA? And it sounds like you've got that. So I'm going to go ahead and read one of the next questions that have come up in the chat.
Great. Okay.
So this is from Elizabeth. What aspects of the culture do you believe are helping professional women to succeed at this time? What aspects are hindering us?
Well, we have more women represented everywhere. We have everyone from Nancy Pelosi to Liz Cheney, or women on all sides speaking up. And we have 50% of our medical students are physicians. We have women in more of the professions. We have always, in our profession, been more dominated by women. But I think, and that's probably true. That's probably true. So I think what helps us is that we have women positioned in strong places, but we have men who believe in women positioned in strong places. For as much as we have men demeaning women, we have men who are supporting women. I have felt very supported by men and women in AGPA. And I have felt I felt very, very grateful for that. One of the things that I have worried a lot about military women, and we did a study on that. And, you know, it was all about, and thankfully now they won't have to report any kind of sexual abuse to someone who's an officer. But what I keep learning is that two things, that women have suffered a great deal. I mean, these were veterans, women veterans. And when we had in our sample, we opened it up. We had women veterans who were living homeless on the streets of New York. And some of them had college degrees. And I thought, how does someone serve our country and end up like this? Now, I know we have male veterans who have suffered a great deal too, but I guess what I'm saying is we need more and more steps to help women, like that recent mandate that now we used to say all the time to military women, don't go through the ranks, find an outside clinician if you have been raped. Because there was nothing good coming from working within the system. And when we did the study about it, their biggest place was the VA was not, they did not feel welcome. And I'm thinking, you know, at AGPA, I welcome hearing it, but I don't get the feeling that women are not welcomed. I think there's always the old boys club. As someone who, my kids say I'm no fun, I don't eat, I don't drink, I don't do any of those things. So I'm never going out to dinner with guys who are going to spend the night at the bar, but that's just as well because I prefer who I have dinner with. But I don't think we have too hard a mountain to climb in terms of women voices at AGPA. I think I will tell you that my practice is half men and half women. And the men who have come have said I could never speak to a man about this. All of my, the majority of my victims of the church scandal are men. And they asked me, they knew there were others, that I was seeing others, and they asked me, how about we get to meet each other? I said, you mean you want to be a group? And they said, yes. When I saw these men hug each other, because they had never revealed it to other men who they played soccer with, it was very powerful. But I guess the answer to the question is on the inside, I think something like this is really important because I think there's a special bond with women. And I think that we can support each other and mentor each other in any way we can. And that's important. But I think that we don't have it too bad with men in our organization. I think we have problems with diversity in the organization. I think we have to address that. I think systemic racism has to be addressed, and I think we're trying, but we can't ignore that. I think on the outside, I think it depends on how it impacts you, how laws impact you. The problem of Roe versus Wade, the I'll tell you the countertransference is I have patients on all sides of this spectrum. So I say to myself, when I have someone telling me all about the conspiracy theories or why Roe versus Wade must be overturned, and I feel my stomach go into a knot, I can tell myself, so how am I going to help this person? I cannot start a whole lecture. This is where this person's coming from, a very, very devout religious person. So what I approach is helping her reduce her stress. I put aside what her agenda is, and I'm trying to deal with the fact that she has irritable bowel syndrome, that she can't sleep, and that she's ill from the stress. So, I mean, that's a question that people have asked in terms of us running our groups. How much of a stand do we take? I don't think we can tolerate microaggressions. I don't think we can tolerate abuse. I think in some ways we might need to stop the process if we think it's on the verge of becoming verbally violent in any way. I think we're responsible for the people in the group. But the question is, how do you run a group where you have people from different political persuasions? Unless you invite them to consider this is a little example of the outside world. You're not going to be able to shield yourself with everyone who believes politically, medically, in terms of spirituality, exactly what you believe. So we're going to have to try to figure out how to make it work. I don't know if I've answered Elizabeth's question. Was it Elizabeth who asked that question?
Yes, she followed up, and I think you've been speaking to it. She followed up with saying that some say that in AGPA there's been progress made in terms of diversity and inclusion, and others say there's been very little, and to kind of share your thoughts around that.
Well, one of my thoughts was I kept wishing we were in COVID, and I kept thinking there was such important dialogue that went online, that went on the listserv. But because people couldn't see faces, because we couldn't read nuance, I think many people held back. They didn't know how to enter it, and they were afraid they would somehow get caught in it. And the saddest thing would be to not have that kind of dialogue go on. But I kept thinking, I wish that we had a way, and maybe we have to think about that. And we tried to do some of that at the annual meeting. I think so much is read in the faces of people in terms of what they say. And what you write and what you say are two often very different things. I have people very often hysterical with a family member over a text message, but we don't really know the tone of the message. And I think so many people were so upset. But so I kept balancing my thinking between, they can't shut this down, but we've got to do something about this to make it more viable. And I don't know if that means an ongoing group where people come into a Zoom call like this and talk about this week's feelings politically or issues about gender and race, etc. But I thought everything I've ever wrote about couples or families and people accepting has to do with eye contact, has to do with if someone lets you make eye contact, that means they're letting you touch them. How can that happen? Only with, the listserv. And so my answer is I think you're right. There's much more work to do. We need the programs to happen, but maybe we need some sort of ongoing dialogue that also involves seeing each other.
And so I'd like to follow that up, Sue, and certainly open it up to our wonderful women participants here to share in this conversation. So in light of everything that you've shared in these really amazing and wonderful experiences, and I think some of the questions that's come through the chat, and when we're looking in the context of women and women under marketing themselves, not necessarily around their practices, but also their experiences or personal challenges or shortcomings or even successes. Just kind of wanted to, how do you bring that together, perhaps for listeners, that didn't get to join us today? What are some of the roadmaps that might enable or support them in doing that, in spite of the different challenges?
Well, we face the question of what people love doing. So some people love writing. I know Shoshana and Anne both love writing. I love writing. So that's a way to take a personal experience and share it with others so they may benefit from it. But I think that it can be done in other ways too. I so much want people to propose for the annual meetings, to try out, find a senior person and ask if a senior person would like to give an institute, would like you to join them in an institute. We have lots of senior people giving institutes. I've always done institutes. And if someone said, Sue, I would like to do an institute with you, that would be fine. I think more of our senior people maybe should include a newer person, a younger person with them. Because the institutes are really so much about process. And I think you learn from co-leaders. We've done so much co-leading, many of us, that's really where we learn, even is from each other. So I think that is something that is a way to promote themselves. I think try not to be too afraid of exposure. I think, we think our patients don't know us, but our patients know us from everything we do, where everything they see on our screens, everything about them. And sometimes people who know me know I will disclose things, and people, not only do they not use it or misuse it, they're very complimented. They feel complimented that I would share something. Like if someone says to me, I don't understand why my son won't say anything. I said, oh, I had a son who was a CIA agent. I used to say to him, if you tell me, Christopher, what's going on in your life, will you have to kill me? Because I know nothing about what's going on in your life. So if there's a common experience that I've had, I'll use it in my practice, but I would also use it sometimes in my group. And you would invite people to do the same. But I think I hadn't thought of it before tonight, but I think more and more senior people might want to pair up with new people. Women with women, women with men. I mean, maybe we have to mix it up a little bit so we bring generations together in AGPA, because I think the older generation need to be much more cognizant of diversity, of the systemic racism, of microaggressions. I have purposely done shows. Some of the most powerful, two powerful shows were on transgender. When our son became our daughter, and the transgender marriage, and I felt so moved by them, and I understood it in a way I could never have understood it. It was the second show I did, and the woman was so nervous about talking about the fact that her son became our daughter that she said, I can't do a live show. Do you mind pre-recording the show so that if people start calling in, I won't feel embarrassed or I won't feel in some way attacked? I said, of course. And we don't have millions of call-ins anyway. So at any rate, so she shares a story of her son saying, can't do it anymore, Mom. I want, my friend, right? I don't know if you know he's gay. She goes, you're not gay, are you? So he goes, no. But I can't be a male because I'm female. I'm a woman. And she describes this happening on Christmas Eve. She says when I was reading it, I was crying, listening to her describe herself. And she said, I couldn't think straight. I couldn't make any sense of it. So over the days, it takes 5 years. This young man he'd seen a therapist. He had gotten the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. He was already making the transition. So then she says, she and her husband begin to fight. She's screaming at her husband because he won't take a stand against this. She's afraid her son will be killed. She's afraid her daughter it becomes her daughter, but she won't really say that for a long time. And then she says, Stephen, you have to do something for me. Now that you're becoming a woman, you have to call yourself Stephanie. And her daughter now said, Mom, Stephen no longer exists. My name's going to be Heather. And that's who I am now. I'm Heather. And in one scene, it reminded me of my mom when I had teenagers in the house. Her mother says to her, you know, there's a very lovely young girl who's been in our house lately. It's actually the son who's made the transition. And she talks about, the name of the book is Trading Places, the power of accepting your child, and we could say your spouse or whoever you work with, for who they are. But that as her son became Heather and became more and more happy, for 5 years, she said, we traded places and I became the anxious, isolated one. So I said, so how do you feel now? And she said, my son never had a friend for all his childhood. Heather lives on the East Coast. She's a psychologist. She's happy. And what can I say? It was the right thing. So in terms of, that's a long answer to younger generation being more and more knowledgeable about, about many topics that I think those of us who are older in AGPA could benefit from. And there's a lot of cross-pollination that could and should happen. That's what I feel happens with Rachel. And having sponsored her to be to get one of the AGPA scholarships a long time ago.
Thank you. So we'd like to invite our audience to share any thoughts or additional questions. I know we've been really lively in the chat. We'd like to invite you to join in our discussion.
I guess I'm curious. So I'm planning to be a first-time faculty member at AGPA in 2021.
Okay.
Any thoughts on how to bridge my career into AGPA? I've heard taking a stand in what it is that I feel passionate about, connecting through shared interests, reaching out to senior faculty. Would those be some thoughts for moving forward in that?
Yes. Are you going to be a faculty for an institute? Are you going to do a presentation, Carmen?
Workshop.
A workshop.
I do not want that level of
I would
responsibility.
look at who else is presenting workshops, and I would connect with them and say, I'm a first-time person doing this workshop. I noticed you're doing a workshop. It's a similar theme. I wonder if you have some time to chat. I think that's a good thing to do, to go to other people's workshops. I think that the more we support each other, and it's often happened, it's almost always happened that when I've heard someone speak and I really loved it, I've either written a blog on the topic because it got me thinking, or I've asked them to come on one of the shows, or I've asked them to be a presenter somewhere else. I think that if you just keep, connecting with people and passing it forward, and many people are true experts in things that we may not be experts in. And that's thrilling too, to be able to learn from each other. I wonder if there's anything that the audience thinks I didn't cover that they wanted me to cover in terms of women promoting women. What is that a question?
Yeah, Elizabeth asked, I think this is fantastic. What are your thoughts about women in law enforcement in terms of professional development? I'm also a federal correction officer, also a psychologist, also ABPP and group in rural Missouri.
I love you, Elizabeth. This is wonderful. I loved all the women, helicopter pilots or whatever that I've come to know or spoken to. I think we need more women. I think one of the things we see in gender, even in the boardroom, I don't think women panic like men. And I don't think when women are dysregulated, they go to violence as quickly as men. You know, we are all faulted at, we go to talking and maybe we never stop talking, but I'd rather someone talk than shoot. So I actually think I'm loving that you are one of us. You have the expertise. I'm hoping that people like you can make a difference. It would be great to offer some sort of workshop. And or at your local precinct, do they want buddy training? You know, or something like that that you could offer, not even that you presume to know something they don't know, but you do have an expertise. After we did so much military intervention after 9/11, because we went from firemen to cops to police, and then chaplains wanted training. Military chaplains wanted to know about psychological first aid. Like maybe that's a group that would be really very interested in, it used to be CISD, you know, critical incidents training. And then they decided that was actually, you know, too set up and you had to respond a certain way. But we presented at their Congress, it was called a Congress, but at their conference, group psychological first aid. We use it all the time now. And so, you know, please feel free to connect with me if you think there's anything we can offer, or any of us can offer that you could pass forward, even to one person in charge. The way Camp Galaxy happened at the 106, they would never let anybody who was not a military person come in and offer anything. And it took me a long time dealing with the woman who was in charge of the readiness program, talking to her about the fact that we had done this program going on after loss. It was to help children whose parents had been lost on 9/11. And we were losing, we have the 106, and I live near them. We lost, just 2 years ago, we lost 4 of the dads. And I said, we can translate that program to your children. We have funding for it. Do you want to give it a try? And she was willing. And that was well over 12 years ago. This year, because of COVID, we have packaged it, literally, it's like takeout food. We have packaged this entire program. We're going to train the service members and the parents at the family center, and they're going to do COVID. They're going to do the program because of COVID. Because I have a group that is older. So I always have some doctoral students, etc. But I couldn't back then, and now with the variant, I can't, but they're willing to have us do it. But I guess what I'm saying, you really have an opening because you are one of them. I encourage you to use that dual connection to really outreach, and then pull some of the rest of AGPA if you need the support, or train us with how we could approach them, because that's the other expertise you have. Great, great.
I love that. So I remember, Dr. Phillips, I had said it looks like you were coming up on 300 episodes on the talk show right now, this iteration of it. Do you have a plan for like making, have we already hit the 300th? Like, do you try and make that like a specific like topic? Or
I'm always so engrossed in the topic that it came up as a surprise when it was 295. And in that show, I said, well, this is our 295th show. But I'm usually so involved and excited to deal with my guest that I haven't been counting. But when you counted, I went back and saw that that was true. I'm always looking for something that excites me in the field or slightly off the field. And then I read the book, and everyone I have on the show says, you read the book? And I say, yes. They go, oh, I don't, on some, you know, if it's on a very short show, I guess they don't read the book. But I feel like if they're coming on a show for 57 minutes, the least I can do is read the book. But I wanted to read the book, which is why I invited them to come on. But thank you for counting, Carmen.
It's certainly a significant achievement. I think as I'm newer in my career, I sit back and I'm like, oh my goodness, like going from, running groups to then being outreach chair and the work that you've done, it's quite inspiring. And
Thank
so, I'm very excited to share AGPA with you and am grateful for your time and sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. I'm so glad people heard and participated, and thanks both to you and Rochelle. And all the friendly faces that I know on this.
Shoshana, I'm not sure if you have a comment or question. I noticed you're unmuted.
No, I was just amazed. I know Suzanne for a very long time, but I learned a lot of things about what you have done. And I agree with all the suggestions that Suzanne came up with. Just to be visible with areas that you are interested in, and bring your friends. I think that that's the motto of women helping women.
Well, I should say something about Shoshana. I'm so glad you spoke of it. I've done a lot of writing and a lot of articles, but one of the first of the AGPA group who's ever asked me to do articles is Shoshana. And when people ask you to do an article, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to write? But in almost every case, a colleague like Shoshana, and she was editor of the group journal for a while from EGPS, right? But you wouldn't do it if you weren't asked. But once you're asked, you figure out you could do it. And she was a great editor. But that's the other thing, is that when people ask you to do something, or do you want to do something, give it a try. They're always going to support you. They're always going to help you along. Someone says you want to write a chapter, or you say to a colleague, I would like to write a chapter on something, but I'm a little nervous. You want to do it together. Always is better, because then you have some support. Any way you can use the hive or the group, it would be a great thing.
Well, I just learned the secret about you. I've never known that this was the first time that you did something like that.
Yes.
It was a great job from the get-go.
Yes, thank you.
But I think that this was the time that a very short time after I started doing it. So I was also new.
Yes, we were both new. Yeah.
And I think that says something about women. We take risks.
Women do take risks.
Yeah. And I've heard Oprah Winfrey talk about a couple of inspiring things just recently. And she said, you take a risk. If you don't make it, it's not a failure. It's just that you have to think about a different path to take. Right. And I think that that's a very good point.
Yes, it's like it's a creative mindset. It's a growth mindset. You think of the mistake as an opportunity to learn. Yeah. The other thing that I guess I wanted to share is, if you've ever read the book Originals, one of the things that they say is, nobody just writes a Pulitzer Prize winning play. Nobody writes a great blog. They write hundreds and hundreds of blogs, plays where, and then you never know one of them takes off. But you just got to keep doing it. Keep doing it. I'm so excited for you, Carmen, that you're going to present, and I'm hoping some of our other young folks and women will join in and take chances. And I'm suggesting knock on the door of some of our senior women and invite them to do it with you.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge, your expertise, the stories that kind of really weave in and highlight just, the individual that you are, the woman that you are, and really helping to encourage the women here and others who will listen to this talk, to encourage them, and really also just helping us to each one reach one in some ways, and really kind of highlighting the work of women. And for those of you who were there at the beginning, it's the reason why we pause and really gave you due by reading and sharing your bio, because we really wanted to promote and highlight that. And often we skip and gloss over it. So we wanted to pause and intentionally do that. So again, we really thank you for taking time out of your schedule, out of your day, out of your week to be here. And we also thank all of you for taking time out of your evening. You could be anywhere and be doing anything. So thank you for joining us.
I also want to thank the two of you for organizing this program.
Yes.
I think that it's a new program, and publicizing the recording will bring more people in, and I fully support it.
It's a great program. Thank you. I felt honored to start off with you. I did.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you, Suzanne, for everything that you've shared.
Thank you. Thanks very much for coming.
Okay.
Until next time.
Okay.
Okay.
Good night, folks. Take care. Be safe.
Bye-bye.
Everybody be
Awesome.
safe. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, both of you. Was it what you wanted, ladies?
Absolutely. No, it was great.
Okay.
Do you want to stop the recording? It's okay.